Welcome to the Sewer Wealth Podcast, where we bring you the timeless wisdom of the world's greatest business and wealth-building books. In each episode, we break down proven strategies from legendary minds, so you can apply them to your own journey toward financial freedom and success. So, get ready to unlock the secrets of success, one book at a time.
All right, welcome back for another deep dive. We recently did a really in-depth look at James Allen's As a Man Thinketh, and, I know I was really fascinated by the whole connection between your thoughts and how they create your purpose.
Yeah, super powerful stuff.
And so today we're going to dive even deeper into that same book, but this time we're going to be looking at it through a specific lens, building wealth. So how do these ideas about your inner life, how do they play out when it comes to achieving financial success? That's what we're going to explore today.
Yeah, that's right. We're looking As a Man Thinketh, but we're focusing on how those principles, the ones about your inner life, how they can have these really profound and practical implications for what you achieve out there in the world, especially when it comes to your financial well-being.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And we're starting with this section that Allen calls the thought factor in achievement. And I think right off the bat, he just hits you with this really powerful idea. Everything you accomplish and everything you don't is a direct result of your own thoughts. I mean, it's pretty intense, when you think about it. It puts a lot of responsibility squarely on your shoulders.
It really does. And that's one of the core elements here. Allen's talking about this concept of a justly ordered universe.
Yeah.
But, maybe instead of thinking about that as some kind of mystical idea, think about it more like a system where over time, your consistent habits of thought, like what you're thinking day in and day out, actually shapes your reality. Your strengths, weaknesses, where you are in life right now, all of it, according to Allen, it all originates from within you.
It's interesting because it's like he's saying you're not just a product of your circumstances, you're actually creating your circumstances.
Yeah.
Through your thoughts.
Absolutely.
And I love this line. He says, as he thinks, so he is. As he continues to think, so he remains. And so for me, I interpret that as your ongoing thought patterns. They're constantly building the foundation of who you are, what your life looks like, and of course, your financial situation. So like your inner dialogue, what you're saying to yourself in your head has a very real and tangible impact on your outer world.
Totally. And, this leads us to another really important idea. Getting help from others is great. It can be beneficial, but the real lasting change, the change that sticks, has to come from within you. Someone can offer you a hand, right? But you got to be willing and able to grab onto it and develop your own strength. Yeah. No one can fundamentally change your financial picture for you. You have to be the one to make that shift.
It makes you think about all the advice people get, about money. Like you can read all the books, listen to all the podcasts, but if you don't actually internalize that information and change your mindset, it's not going to make much of a difference.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so now here's where it gets really thought-provoking, at least for me. He touches on the whole idea of oppression and servitude. And, traditionally, you often hear that the oppressor is entirely to blame, right? Like it's their fault. But Allen brings up this alternative viewpoint, and it's pretty challenging. He's suggesting that oppression can only actually take hold if people are in some way willing to be oppressed. What do you think about that?
Definitely a challenging perspective. I'll agree with you there. I don't think it's about excusing any harmful actions or anything like that. But it does make you pause and think about, what are the internal factors, right, that might allow these kinds of negative external forces to hang on, to stick around.
It's like, are you participating in your own oppression in some way?
Right. And Allen actually kind of brings those two sides together. He suggests that both the oppressor and the oppressed are, and this is quote, cooperators in ignorance. And he's saying they're ultimately both causing harm to themselves, but it's all happening through their mindset, through their limited beliefs.
So it's almost like they're both trapped in this cycle of negativity, right? They're just on different sides of it.
Oh, boy.
And then he brings up these concepts of perfect knowledge, perfect love, and perfect compassion. And I'm curious, how do those apply, especially when you're talking about limitations, maybe specifically financial ones?
That's a great question. So, okay, perfect knowledge, I would say in this context, you can think of it as like a deep, deep understanding of how these, mental laws actually operate. It's like recognizing that, your thoughts about lack, if you're constantly thinking about not having enough, for example, that can actually perpetuate a state of lack in your life. Perfect love in this context, I think, means looking at everything, both the broader societal stuff and what's happening in your own personal life, and looking at it all with empathy. It's understanding that there's suffering involved, without immediately jumping to judgment or blame.
Right, like not making it personal.
Exactly. And then there's perfect compassion, which is really about embracing both sides. It's seeing the shared human experience in everything, even when things are really tough. So for you, it means understanding your own journey, your financial journey, your career journey, whatever it is, with compassion. It's recognizing those patterns, those thought patterns, without beating yourself up about it.
So it's like, if you find yourself in a situation you want to change, say financially, the key isn't just to get angry at external factors, but to actually look inward first and start working on elevating your own thinking.
Precisely. Alan's whole point is you rise, you overcome obstacles, you achieve goals by raising the level of your thoughts. And on the flip side, if you're constantly stuck in negativity and those limiting beliefs, you're probably going to stay stuck. It all starts with that internal shift in your mindset.
Now, he gets pretty direct when he talks about worldly success, and he specifically mentions the need to sacrifice, quote, slavish animal indulgence. And I gotta be honest, that sounds a little old-fashioned to me. Well, what's the modern take on that for someone who's, really trying to build wealth today?
Okay, yeah, you're right. That language is a little bit from a different era. But think of slavish animal indulgence as consistently prioritizing immediate gratification over your long-term financial goals. It can be things like, impulsive spending, always chasing that next little dopamine hit, constantly looking for those fleeting pleasures that just drain your resources. Or maybe it's avoiding the hard work and discipline it takes to grow financially because, it's easier to just kick back and relax. Alan's not saying you can't enjoy life, of course, but what he's arguing is that when you're totally dominated by those immediate desires, it clouds your judgment. It prevents you from planning strategically, and it really stops you from developing the skills and the resources you need to truly succeed financially. It's all about making conscious choices.
That makes sense. So it's like if you're constantly giving in to that urge for instant gratification, it's going to be really hard to stick to a budget or be patient with long-term investment.
Exactly.
And he even goes so far as to say that someone who's controlled by this bestial indulgence, that's his phrase, is not fit to really manage things or be independent. Why is that? What's the connection there?
Because when you really break it down, their thinking is so focused on those immediate needs and wants that they haven't developed the mental discipline, the foresight, the self-control that it takes to handle real responsibilities. They can't make those sound financial decisions and stand on their own 2 feet. Their thought patterns are actually holding them back from acting independently and effectively in the world.
It's almost like their impulses are running the show, not their higher thinking. And then he draws this really direct line between this whole idea of sacrifice and actually making progress, especially when it comes to building wealth. It's not just about avoiding bad habits, right? It's about actively choosing to give up less important things for bigger financial gains down the line.
That's it. Alan's suggesting that your worldly success, how well you do financially, will be directly proportional to how much you're willing to sacrifice those, quote, confused animal thoughts, basically. The impulsive desires and that short-sighted thinking.
Yeah.
And also how much you focus on, your financial plan, strengthen your resolve, and really cultivate self-reliance. It's like the more you can delay gratification and focus on the bigger picture, the greater your potential is for achieving those financial goals.
So it's not just about being frugal. It's about being strategic and intentional with your choices.
Yeah.
And it's not just about your bank account either, right? I mean, he seems to imply that as you elevate your thinking in this way, something else positive happens to you as a person.
Oh, absolutely. As you lift your thoughts, and you start exercising that self-discipline, not only do you increase your chances of financial success, but you also actually become, in Alan's words, more manly, upright, and righteous. It's like your character develops right alongside those achievements. And that was a big part of Alan's philosophy. Higher thinking leads to more lasting and meaningful outcomes in every area of your life.
I like that. So it's like the process of building wealth, if done right, can actually make you a better person.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, this next part is super interesting. He talks about this idea that the universe itself ultimately favors those who are honest, generous, and virtuous, even if it sometimes looks like, the greedy or the dishonest are getting ahead.
Right. Right. And this is something you see in so many different philosophies and spiritual traditions. Alan's suggesting there's a fundamental order to things, like a cosmic order, that rewards integrity and those positive character traits over the long term. So yeah, while it might seem like the people cutting corners or, acting shady are the ones winning, Alan's saying that true and lasting success, the kind that actually matters, is built on this foundation of virtue. And when you actively cultivate those qualities in your thoughts and actions, you're aligning yourself with that natural order.
That's a powerful concept. So even if it doesn't seem like it in the moment, being a good person actually pays off.
Yeah.
In the long run. Now, this doesn't just apply to, financial or business success, does it? I mean, he also talks about intellectual and spiritual achievements.
Yeah, he does. And for Alan, intellectual achievements, they come from that focused thought, that directed energy towards knowledge, towards beauty, towards truth. Even if your ego or ambition play a part, the real substance of intellectual accomplishment, it lies in that dedicated and, kind of unselfish pursuit of these higher ideals. It's about a genuine love for learning and understanding.
And what about when he talks about spiritual achievements? What does that look like, in the context of this idea of focused thought?
For him, spiritual achievements are like the natural outcome, the natural result of consistently noble and pure thoughts. He actually uses this really powerful image. He talks about the sun at its brightest and the moon at its fullest. And it's to illustrate how, when your thoughts are consistently pure and unselfish, it leads to wisdom, strong moral character, influence, and a deep sense of fulfillment. It's almost like the unfolding of a life that's really centered around higher ideals.
So if we pull it all together, what's the key insight about achievement that Alan's offering here? For someone who's listening and maybe they're thinking, okay, I want to build a better life, financially or otherwise, what's the takeaway?
He puts it really beautifully. He says, achievement of whatever kind is the crown of effort, the diadem of thought. And then he goes on to list the qualities that really lead to progress: self-control, determination, purity of intention, integrity, and focused thinking.
Yeah.
And then he contrasts those with those negative thought patterns like laziness, impurity, and confusion. Those are the things that lead to decline. It's like a roadmap, really. Your inner world is what shapes your outer achievements.
It's a powerful reminder that your thoughts aren't just these passive things floating around in your head. They're actually active forces that are shaping your reality. But he also, throws in a word of caution here, doesn't he? It's like, even if you reach a high level of success, you're not immune to slipping back if your thoughts change.
Exactly. He cautions that even if you achieve some significant success, whether it's in your career, your finances, your personal growth, you can easily backslide if you allow arrogance, selfishness, or negative thinking to creep back in. Success is not a permanent state. It requires this ongoing vigilance over your thought patterns.
Right. It's like anything you want to maintain. You can't just reach the goal and then just stop paying attention. You have to constantly nurture it, protect it.
Yeah, exactly. And he emphasizes that, any victories that you've achieved, if they were achieved through positive thinking, they require this continuous watchfulness. And, he actually says a lot of people stumble right after they feel like they've made it, like they become complacent and they let those negative thought patterns sneak back in, and it can lead to a really rapid decline.
That's a good point. It's almost like the more successful you become, the more important it is to guard your mindset.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
And it sounds like these underlying principles, they apply across the board, right? Like whether you're talking about business success or having some kind of intellectual breakthrough or even spiritual growth, it all comes back to the same basic ideas.
Totally. Alan's arguing that all achievements, all of them, they're ultimately the result of intentionally directed thought. And it all follows the same fundamental principles. The only thing that really changes is what you're aiming to achieve. The actual process, the focused intention, the disciplined thinking, it applies to everything.
Okay, so the last thing he talks about in this section is this principle about the relationship between what you're willing to sacrifice and what you can ultimately achieve. Can you remind us what he says there?
Yeah, he states it very clearly. He says, "He who would accomplish little must sacrifice little. He who would achieve much must sacrifice much. He who would attain highly must sacrifice greatly." So it's a really direct link between, the level of effort you put in and what you're willing to give up in order to reach your goals.
Yeah.
So for you, thinking about your financial aspirations, what are you truly willing to sacrifice in terms of that immediate gratification for that long-term security and abundance?
It's a great question, and I think it really brings everything we've been talking about today back full circle. Your thoughts, they play a vital role in what you achieve, and it really highlights, how active you need to be in shaping your own success through the choices you make in your thinking.
Yeah, definitely. It all comes down to that, and it lays the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about next time.
That's right. Our deep dive into As a Man Thinketh is going to continue in our next episode. We're moving on to another super compelling section called Visions and Ideals, and I'm really excited to dig into that.
Yeah, me too. Looking forward to it.
All right, well, make sure you join us for that conversation. Until next time, bye-bye.
See you then. Bye.